too. So now we're into the interpolation or hailing of the everyday subject rather than the tenured megastar with, whose research is done on the backs of contingent labor. And of course some of you are already superstars. But anyway, there was a slight disagreement before lunch when I got up and said, are you expecting that each one of you will speak for a couple of minutes about your work or not? Some people were clearly saying, I don't want to do that, or at least I think they were. But I was told that an entire wall insisted that every single person do it. So I guess what I would like is if as many people as possible felt able to say, this is what I'm working on. But those who just don't wish to do that shouldn't be required to. Do you know what I mean? Some of you might have a massive amount of work already developed. Those of you who are involved in PhD programs, for example, some will be ABD, already doing research, and some will be starting master's students or not doing theses. Some will be faculty who've already written 27,000 books. There's such a difference in people's backgrounds, occupational trajectories, and so on, but I just don't want to make everybody feel like they have to say, you know, in the first trimester of my research, I will do the following or whatever, right? So I'd say 3 or 4 minutes each, if that's okay, where you could say your name and what institution you're at, and then what you're working on or what interests you that might articulate to others, or if it doesn't seem to be relevant to this event, that doesn't matter either. I think you should just say what's on your mind, and I think it'd be great if others wanted to jump in and ask a question if we do that too.
Susan Ashley, Communication and Culture, York University, Toronto. I'm just sort of recently in my later life returned to do a PhD after many years of working in various types of communication, primarily in museums and heritage sites, and also in journalism. So I had to choose which direction I was going to go in. So I would say my research area, although it's sort of media and communications in general, is in public cultural and heritage institutions, so primarily museums. So I'm really interested in the way museums are moving from kind of a governmentality, as in governmental, instrument of modernity kind of mode into something else. So they're having to deal with issues of globalization and multiculturalism, and of course culture is resource. And so I'm interested for my dissertation, which I've just kind of drafted a proposal for, I'm interested in looking at various issues around this in terms of a museum in my town, Toronto, called the Royal Ontario Museum. It happens to be the biggest museum in Canada, and it's undergoing what's being called a renaissance. And it's a $300 million project, Daniel Libeskind architecture, you know, the whole thing. And so I'm going to be using this as my site and kind of, I guess, doing the multi-dimensional ethnography approach to it that you were referring to. Looking at the hard stuff, so what they're doing with planning, what the policy context is, and that kind of thing, but also looking at the subjective side, trying to do interviews with top to bottom, internal to the organization, so from your security guard to your board of trustees, but also the externals, so the grassroots people, the press, local residents, visitors, and so on, to get a bigger, clearer picture of how people are looking at the museum as it acts in the public interest, and answering that question, hopefully, how the museum acts in the public interest.
Anybody want to jump in there? Whom are you working with at York? One of the crazies or one of the good people?
Oh, there's a lot of stories there. I won't go into it.
It's, when York University is invoked, this is the first question that comes to mind of those who know of it.
No, a policy person, okay?
Oh, well.
A nice sedate policy.
Okay, hi, I'm Aubrey Annable, and I'm in Visual and Cultural Studies at the University of Rochester, and I'm currently just finishing up a dissertation that's titled Digital Decay, New Visual Culture, Agency, and Urban Space, and I'm interested in how new media subjectivities are kind of colliding or are mutually constitutive with new urban subjectivities and questions around those collisions. And I'm also working on a new project that's broadly on gaming and labor and issues of bad techno subjects, basically, sort of bad ways of playing, and whether there's sort of a politics of bad creativity, I guess.
That's great.
I wouldn't say
are you a player?
I wouldn't say I'm like a power gamer, no, but I do play, yeah.
My name's Lisa Hajar. I'm in the Law and Society program at UC Santa Barbara.
She's the chair.
Yeah, I'm the chair. The reason I came is not because I work on art, but because I wanted to hang out with David and Toby. And in fact, my application said that I know nothing about this. I know nothing about the field, and it's been very nice to get out of my typical field, which is torture. I'm working on a book on torture.
And all I thought this was torture.
Yeah.
Right.
No, but all I do is think about torture, email people about torture. So it's very nice to, talk about art, and I have people I can email about art. But the creative side is that I'm working in theory on a book about how the good lawyers have strived to respond to the Bush administration's torture regime. And there is a lot of creative thinking about how to respond to a lot of things that were initially secret, et cetera. So I'm getting some tangential great inspiration from this. So I'm very glad to be here, and I've learned a huge amount so far.
Well, when you think about the way in which a lot of people in the United States actually have their knowledge of torture under this regime indexically, i.e. from photos in the New Yorker magazine.
Right, indeed.
Those questions become pretty important even to simpletons such as ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, the Abu Ghraib photos totally blew open the lid, and so everything, all the people I work on literally were inspired by the Abu Ghraib photos, which opened up the whole field.
Right,
So,
and in terms of both what those pictures seem to represent and the stories behind who wrote, who created them, who distributed them, and what they appeared to be licensed by. All of that, it seems to me, is very much part of our story, actually. So, yeah.
I'm Thea Petchler, and I'm at Art Center College of Design. I am trying to write the story of the professionalization of creativity, which has taken the past 60 years, at least in the US, and had its origins in a very nationalist Cold War agenda. So the short version is business culture called for creative thinking. Social scientists went and sought it out in a lab and encoded it in a series of sort of problem-solving steps. And then management discourse took it up, and it's sort of an inversion of some of what we're talking about now, with art and artists being the sort of origin point and borrowed from. So if Daniel Pink says now that the MBA is the new MFA, I guess I'm arguing that the MBA has always been the MFA, and the MFA has had a lot of trouble.
Okay, well, my name's Nicole Archer, and I'm a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz's History of Consciousness department. And before I say anything about my project, there are so many people in this room that made my project possible that I just want to say thank you for organizing this. So this has been a really great opportunity. But so I'm in the middle of writing my prospectus, so I'm all like nervous, like whatever I say here is going to sorry, but okay. So my dissertation project basically takes the ubiquity of certain figures of the textile via references to weaving, stitching, folding, or coats, if we're talking about Marx, or other things like that, very, very seriously, particularly in major canonical texts and critical theory texts, major canonical critical texts. And then thinks about how these figures generally assume a woven textile always as their model, and how this kind of asserts and reproduces a certain model of difference onto these theories. And so also how these texts very seldomly ever consider the actual material practices involved in producing these textiles and the individuals involved in that labor. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to see how, looking at these figures, so what I'm trying to do is kind of introduce a more technical language into these discourses and also introduce figures that aren't woven. So be they really obvious things like vinyl or spray-on textiles, which exist and stuff like that, or knits even, to things that we don't necessarily automatically think of as textiles, but have taken on that form. So the text, you know, like the book or whatever. And I'm doing this kind of in the hopes that it might provide new, or not new, different kind of critical models, tropes, and strategies to work with in light of the current political situation. So. And that's because I do a lot of activism around garment workers and stuff like that. We're looking for new models, right? So that's what we've been talking about all day. So, excellent.
Okay, I'm Carrie Malcolm. I'm at Rutgers English, and I'm currently working on my dissertation, which I just started a little less than a year ago. And I'll give you the title. It's called "Approaching the Megacities, Slums and Shantytowns in Global Culture." Contemporary global culture. And so, yeah, I'm looking at artists, novelists, filmmakers who are interested in the space of the shantytown or informal housing all over the world, but particularly in is being called the megacity, the third world city. And I came to that interest for a lot of reasons, but I was particularly interested in the way that various international agencies like the UN and the World Bank have been releasing things over the past 10 years talking about the challenge of slums and the need to think of it as the urban problem for our generation. And then Mike Davis also wrote a book called Planet of Slums, which a lot of people saw as kind of an insufficient response to the development agency talk about it, that maybe it was too dark of a picture of these places and that wasn't taking account of resistance on the ground. So I'm sort of in between. I'm looking at what artists and creative workers are doing on this topic. And you know, there are ways in which it can be looked at as the films that we often are familiar with about shantytowns and slums, favelas, these places. One journalist called it slum exploitation. That it can be exoticizing and very reductive. I think that's true, but I also think that there's an important way in which artists don't play by the rules. So the discursive rules that separate different kinds of commentary and critique from each other, and that's very interesting to me. So the fact that lots of these novels and films mix ethnography, social commentary, and then experiments with language and images. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on there. And in particular for this conference, I'm interested in the notion of creativity because that's something that comes up both in the text, the literary and filmic text that I'm looking at, but also in the UN documents as well. Creativity can be something that policymakers see as, okay, this is slum dwellers are so creative, we don't need to fund, we don't need to help them. They build their own houses. We need to help them take advantage of their own innate creativity. So they're letting themselves off the hook, basically. But then, there are artists who are also genuinely interested in the creativity of these spaces. So. I think that's been one of my, still in the early stages, but that's one of my big questions is, do I look at, I am playing with the idea right now, focusing on, for one chapter, Mumbai, and looking at films, novels, and art exhibits all together. But then part of me also feels like there's something to be said about the way that generic differences come into play, and that novels may be doing something different than films in terms of the way they do narrative. So, but yeah, looking at things like Maximum City Bombay, and then for Hidden Mysteries, A Fine Balance, or some of my Bombay texts. But I'm also looking at South America, Latin America, and parts of Africa. Yes, I'm looking at South Africa, and then also Lagos, Nigeria. Yeah, so Cape Town and Johannesburg. No, there's so many. It's hard to. And I'd just also like to say that it's a contemporary global culture project, so if any of you know of great films or novels or art exhibits about this topic, I know a lot of them, but I can't know them all, so tell me.
Okay, my name is Kirsty Robertson. I'm at the University of Western Ontario, and I have two projects, one of which came out of my dissertation that I'm now desperately trying to turn into a book. It's called Tear Gas Epiphanies, New Economies of Culture, Vision, and Protest in Canada. And what I was looking at was the way that the anti-globalization movement and the creative industries discourse both came out of a common shift in the economy and how they profoundly inflect each other. And I'm looking at it in Canada, because Canada had a very different experience because of its continued reliance on natural resources, most particularly forestry, water, and oil. So just like one really quick example, I was looking at the 2003 anti-war movement was seen as a big success in Canada because Canada did not go to war in Iraq. And because of this, it's eclipsed the fact that Canadian oil really contributes extremely strongly to the war in Iraq, as do Canadian arms manufacturers. So I was looking at the corporate taxation on those businesses that in turn allowed a Canadian War Museum to be built. And there was a biased architect, Raymond Moriyama, and there was a whole discourse over whether it should be called the Canadian War Museum or the Canadian Peace Museum. And in the end, that turned into this narrative that completely disavowed any kind of protest movement around the fact that, again, those tax dollars have allowed the Canadian Army, as part of NATO, to go into Afghanistan. And in Canada, NATO or Canadian troops are still described as peacekeepers. Very rarely do you hear anything about them being part of a massive war on terrorism, quote unquote. So that's just one example, and each chapter is about a different city. My new project is about textiles, and I look at locations where traditional textile industries have died, but those same sites have become invested with new forms of textile production that often have a lot to do with creating labor-free textiles as a way of bringing the industry back home. That's how it's often described. So I look at everything from radical knitting circles to the resurgence of domestic knitting to textiles created for military and police IP debates over textiles. And yeah, this discourse on making seam-free textiles, so there's no piecing required. And also textiles based on petroleum products. Like if anyone's wearing an exercise shirt, it's as Nicole was saying, it's not a woven textile. It's like almost made on a printing press, and that's seen as something that can bring the labor back west. So those are my projects.
Okay, just one sec. Okay, so I'm Kirsten. I'm doing. I just finished first year of a PhD at Goldsmiths College in media and communications in London, and so I've just started. Just finished the first year of a PhD, and but I'm not really strictly doing media and communications research. I'm actually looking at working conditions in the visual art field, and I'm using comparative study of London and Berlin, and it's actually based on my own experience because my background is I've been like a sort of practicing visual artist and a critic, but then I was also a union rep. I was sort of representing sessional or adjunct instructors in an art college, and that's where I started to see kind of how a lot of the values of the art world in terms of competitiveness and individualism and kind of intergenerational competition and I think in connection with the kind of discounting of social movements we were talking about before, made it very hard for people to develop solidarity. So I saw this kind of happening on the ground. And this made me think that I don't want to just do more projects. I felt it was more politically important for me to understand how all this is happening. And I see this as connected to all the issues we've been talking about, where ways that say visual art starts to function as a creative industry. It cannot claim the high ground anymore, I think. I think it's connected to that whole discussion of is the MFA the new MBA and so on. Anyway, so I'm looking at kind of a few different issues. So in looking at artists' working conditions, I'm interested in looking at how do factors that we think of as being outside the arts actually impact the arts, like the cost of living, very practical things. If you think of London, for example, being a very expensive place to live, and Berlin being a cheap place to live, but in Berlin there are no jobs. And then like the possibility of accessing state benefits. And here I'm interested in reading a lot about kind of welfare policy, what has happened to welfare, and the kind of demonization of people on benefits as cheats and parasites, finding ways of critiquing that. And so I'm looking at sort of social policy and labor policy and cultural policy. And I'm interested in this question, if you can become an artist, but also do people see what they're doing as a form of work, or is it about rejecting that deliberately?
But as well, I'm interested in looking at what are forms of organizing that are possible, say, in the arts at this particular political moment. I mean, in terms of methods, I'm interviewing artists and intermediaries and sort of people from organizations, and that includes sort of like service organizations, shared studio spaces, and kind of labor-related organizations. And so I'm kind of I just sort of finished the literature review, and I'm kind of starting fieldwork in London at this point. In terms of the literature review, I was sort of looking at cultural studies and labor sociology, and also some of the autonomous Marxism stuff, like the precarity debate. We've been looking at all this. Like one last thing. I've just sort of basically started doing interviews in London, and one thing I noticed as I talked to some people involved with this organization called the Live Art Development Agency, which is sort of partly kind of a service organization. In some ways, they do a lot of different things. But one thing they said that was interesting is that they said, the person I talked to has been active for quite a while as a kind of organizer, curator, administrator, and she said that what she has noticed in the past 10 years is that the pressure to be a big star immediately. And she said this is impacting a lot of like recent graduates because they deal with a lot of recent graduates, and they feel that this is also sort of changing how artists relate to each other. This pressure to become a big star, or entering the art field as a get-rich-quick scheme. So I just kind of want to throw that out there.
Hi, my name's Todd. I'm a graduate student in English at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm completing my dissertation right now as we speak. I'm yeah, you can all mail this laughter to my advisors. And so it's titled Poetry, Modernity, and Urbanization from 20th Century Chicago to 21st Century London. And it looks at the way in which poets have participated in the development of the urban fabric by contributing a public language about the production of space. I'm also working on a project called An Oral Biography of the Writers' Forum, London Poetry After the Second World War, that looks at the group associated with Bob Cobbing and his kind of guerrilla publishing that was actually responsible for the arrival on the poetry scene of a great many very interesting English poets. And what's interesting about that project is that, A, I want the people to tell it in their own words because they're just hilarious once you get them talking. I mean, they're just incredibly garrulous. But also the way in which they would hijack resources from other institutions like hospitals in order to produce the chapbooks that then, fueled the poetry movement. And it's a kind of different way of looking at British poetry that's not Cambridge-centric. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Hi, I'm Stefka. I'm a PhD student here in the Visual Studies program, and I also work in a variety of visual culture of torture. I work on the Abu Ghraib imagery and its appropriation in the wake of the scandal, and I look at these sites as points in which there is intersection of military policy, state policy, as well as social practice.
It's going to be brief. Hello, here in the corner. My name is Annelene. Hi, he's waving at me. I just finished my first coursework year as a PhD student at UMass, as I told you, and as I have been telling most of you. But before going to UMass and in the ongoing year that I've been there, I've been trying to remap the history of broadcast media in Puerto Rico, which is not recorded in any platform, from two particular perspectives: political economy and broadcast media policy. And besides that, I'm also very interested, I'm also very active in social movements against media consolidation in Puerto Rico in particular. Apart from that, do you remember what Angela McRobbie described this morning about that multitasking kind of job? Okay, well, I have my own production company. I produce music in Puerto Rico. I'm a musician myself, but I'm basically at the backstage work, right? And differently from what she described that is happening in London, in Puerto Rico, it is not a girly kind of job, okay? I'm practically one of the few women doing that in Puerto Rico. Well, it's a very machoist tradition, and it's a very man-dominated field. So, well, and I'm going to be talking about that on Wednesday, so.
Okay, fine. My work is on the print news media in Bangalore. And the title of my dissertation is Informing News, Information Revolution and the Transformation of News Media in Bangalore. So I'm trying to connect the discourse of information revolution in Bangalore and the changes that have happened to the newspaper industry in Bangalore. And I'm taking a sociological and social anthropological approach to understanding the news media. Currently, my fieldwork is on inside a newspaper organization. Fortunately, they've permitted me to, do ethnographic work inside their organization, and I've been given a workstation and all that. So I'm very happy that I've gained access to the stories that get filed, the stories that get killed, and I'm also attending the editorial meetings, observing all this, and I'm talking to journalists on the news floor. I'm kind of very excited about this permission that I've received, and it is the largest newspaper group in India, actually. So I'm kind of looking at the tensions between regional language journalism and English journalism, and how, Doug, I think I'm interested in the issue that you are looking at, how media subjectivities and urban subjectivities collide, and how they are reconfigured in the greater discourse, the larger discourse of information revolution. Right. And the newspapers in India have still not lost out to the new media. So, and that's because literacy is growing, and it has still not reached a saturation point. There is a large domestic market that's yet untapped. So, there's more to catch, and newspapers are increasing their revenue, as well as, they are diversifying, They've taken up the online avatar and a whole lot of other media forms as well. So that is exactly why I'm interested in the print news media. So because the internet penetration is low, it's 1.2%, and this, on the other hand, is 25%, and it's expanding. So, the influence of the mainstream media is far greater than the new media. Yeah.
My name is Riley Snorton. I'm a graduate student at Annenberg School for Communication at UPenn. And I'm also kind of at that stage where I'm trying to work on my prospectus. The tentative title is Trapped in the Epistemological Closet, Black Sexuality in the Popular Imagination. And I'm looking at the cultural phenomena of the down low, which is in U.S., a kind of narrative about Black and Latino men who have sex with other men and are not identifying as gay. But my interest in that is really to think about how that definition is in fact an example of how these bodies are being appropriated by discourses of sexuality, and that it's not able to really fully recognize the kind of political, economic, and infrastructural dynamics that shape Black sexuality and in the popular imagination or in popular culture. So my argument is that rather than thinking about down low as a kind of transitory moment or a moment where people are saying, is that person actually gay, or is this just another example of lies and deceit happening within Black sexual practice, that I want to talk about it in terms of how down low might be kind of confluence of deindustrialization of urban space, Black migration patterns in the United States, and nostalgia. And so I'm looking at R. Kelly's Trapped in the Closet, and I'm also looking at earlier examples like 1930s blues music. And so, part of what I want to look at is how we might think about the down low as being an illumination of the ways in which Black sexuality is often hand in hand with the kind of trope of a glass closet. And so Black sexuality epistemologically and popularly as being something that is always already known. And so I can stop there.
My name is Michelle Cho, and I'm actually an Irvine student. And I'm in the Department of Comparative Literature here. So I was... no, I'm working with Akbar Abbas. Yeah. So anyways, I've been really just, wow, like this event so far has just really kind of caused me to come up with a lot of questions, because I'm sort of like, I don't know if I'm the representative of the kind of humanities person who's like, whoa, all this stuff is happening? No way. But because of course I'm not like that, but I feel like I might embody that in some ways. But anyways, so one of the reasons why I was drawn to SECT is because I've been trying to figure out what kinds of new theoretical paradigms or models can be available for humanities work on, you know, I don't know, areas that are projects that you might have a hard time selling in humanities terms because they are often, I don't know, more social sciencey or something like that. But my area of interest is Korean documentary, and I think I've sort of figured out a way to articulate the choice of Korea, because I'm also not an East Asian studies person, and so I'm not doing area studies. So basically, I'm really interested in the kind of relationship to what work documentary film is expected to do in real terms, or what kind of political agency it's expected to have, or what kind of fantasies of efficacy or action are inscribed in documentary. And Korea is a site in which there is a really specific kind of history of documentary work, and you can be pretty precise about, you know, labeling like the first documentary and what it was like and how that form has changed so much, because there has been this kind of transformation trajectory from a really kind of, this is a naked picture of reality. There aren't as much, or there isn't as much concern over aesthetics in a kind of conventional sense, to shift to personal narratives and highly subjective kinds of you know, takes on particular issues. So I mean, that's not a shift that hasn't happened elsewhere or hasn't been discussed in other contexts, but I think because of the historical specificity of documentary in South Korea, that's sort of, it offers itself as a site for the kind of questions that I want to ask. But anyway, so one question that I'm particularly interested in is the kind of rhetoric of discovery versus invention. So there's a lot of disclaiming invention, that I'm discovering something. And so even though, you know, we might all have the kind of theoretical tools to dismantle that binary, it's still very effective in the way that people talk about these films. So not just the filmmakers themselves, but also critics or, you know, viewers. So I'm really interested in that question. And then I'm also, I kind of have this theory about the way that digital video functions. And there are a whole slew of kind of material issues, of course, and issues about accessibility, and the fact that these documentary films have proliferated with the advent of digital video technology. But there's also, I think, a kind of fantasy of plenitude that comes along with using a medium that is kind of immaterial, or you have, at least theoretically, an infinite kind of recordability or infinite capacity to record. So.
Hi everybody, I'm Nate Harrison. I'm just about to start my third year in the Visual Arts Department at UC San Diego. And as such, I'm also sort of just starting to form my prospectus. But I'm really interested in these, a little bit of both. I'm interested in the discourse of intellectual property, copyright, and appropriation, or specifically within regard to appropriation strategies in the fine arts. I think that kind of discourse, as we all know here through the past few days, and I've also been learning a ton, it's given me a lot of different ideas, I think is a very prevalent one in sort of remix culture and Web 2.0 culture and that thing. But I'm really interested in how artists actually think about appropriation in the quote-unquote fine arts, because there is such a tradition of a certain kind of discourse in that area. Of course, the Duchampian model, the ready-made, through the pop art, then also to the 80s pictures artists and whatnot. But it's in my experience, it's been one that's, again, rooted more in sort of art history, maybe certain types of critical theory, but not so much in terms of legality. And so I'm wondering what artists think about these things in two ways. One, how do they think about it in terms of their own practices? Are they doing appropriation to sort of make some sort of critical gesture against some sort of hegemonic cultural production condition, which has been historically the case, but how do they do that in sort of today's hyper circulation of signs? But also, too, how do they think about appropriation if they themselves run the risk of getting appropriated as they become, and sort of to get back to Kirsten's point, as they become professionalized, as they enter a world that sort of demands a very specific sort of legal regime of a kind of controlled supply and demand of art products. And how do they think of that? How do they, on the one hand, continue the spirit of arts trying to sort of subvert an establishment, at the same time embrace it?
So, hi. Yeah, thanks. My name is Amy Somariva, and I'm a graduate student in the program in Cultural Studies at UC Davis. I am at the point of drafting my prospectus in my program. I'll do my exams and defend my dissertation proposal at some point in the next quarter, so before December. So I have some basic ideas that I can share with you about my project, although I think it's still kind of unwieldy. But in general, I can tell you that my project is about the practices and representations of family history, or maybe what I like to call vernacular historical practice. And there are really like three major sets of questions that I'm interested around this area. And the first has to do with identity, and in particular it has to do with ethnic and racial identity. And so I'm interested in looking specifically at the American Jewish community and asking how family history is a technology of ethnic formation. And so as far as, SECT 5 is concerned, this connects me to how it is that cultural industries such as the crafting industry, the heritage industry, both of which are involved in, providing products, services, commodities that people buy in as they begin to develop family histories that represent their ancestral pasts. How these cultural industries are involved in family and kin networks, and how through this involvement in family and kin networks, they are involved in boundary marking practices that define ethnic groups. The second major area I'm looking at in terms of this has to do with gender and labor. And in particular, here I'm interested in how it is that the social function of family history is shaped by the gendering of family history, and what genders are involved, how certain kinds of gendered bodies are involved in different practices of family history, and the ways in which, in particular, family history tends, although is not always, to be an aspect of someone's responsibility in parenting, usually in mothering or grandmothering. But not always. And then the third area has to do with form, and the way in which family history, vernacular history, differs and speaks back to and is involved in and entangled with professional history and academic history. And I'm interested in how it is that these two domains of history making use different forms, deploy different forms of representation, deploy different strategies of research, but how it is that they also inform one another and speak back to one another. So that's it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Boyer. I've been ABD for 65 days. Yeah. I should have paused after 65. My dissertation project is on public listening practices in the New York City subway. I deal with things like the potential for hearing to be epistemological, performative, political, effective labor, other things like that. And it's an ethnographic project. Technically I'm in a music department, but I'm part of what you would consider the emergent field of sound studies. Or auditory culture studies, it's also known as. So that's enough about that, but I'd like to plug one of the bands I'm in. It's called It's called Happy Fun Smile, and I'm confident in saying we are North America's premier Japanese Chindan, Enka, Obon, Ultra Minyo, and Okinawan pop band. I play one of the instruments I play is the sanshin, which I have on my shirt today. We just finished a tour of the California Obon circuit, and we're looking to next summer to perform in Chindan competitions in Japan, and we're looking for patrons because we can't sell CDs because we're a cover band. We're playing like music that's 75 years old but still under copyright. So we're looking for alternative sources of funding to buy plane tickets. So happyfunsmile.com.
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann Goldschmidt. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Musicology at UCLA. Like Bill, my departmental affiliation isn't exactly accurate because I work on Brazilian music, and in the world of music studies, if you leave the United States and Europe, you're kind of in this lost world. You either have to be an ethnomusicologist or you leave. So I'm kind of a half ethnomusicologist, but that's enough of that. The last case study of my 4-case study dissertation is actually about creative industry folks in Brazil. I actually just completed 2 weeks ago my ethnographic portion of my dissertation. I came back from Brazil, and I was talking to people in the music industry there, specifically people in independent labels, because they were much more willing to talk to me. If you want to get down to it, why independent labels? Because the majors refused to talk to me. And like what George said 2 days ago, it's a thriving industry. Even with all of this talk about crisis, there's so much optimism, it was kind of unbelievable. So yeah, I actually did a lot of work there, and I came to SECT to work and hash out the theoretical side of who these people are and what they're doing with themselves, aside from talking about, you know, the representational element of producing Brazilian music and having it sold all around the world in digital or in material formats. I also was wondering how globalization was affecting these people in the industry itself. I was very curious as to what kind of role they saw themselves as playing in this whole process. And so that's what motivated me to go down there. And that's, oh, also, aside from being a labor activist, I also am a bicycle activist. Yeah, seriously, so if you want to talk to me about that kind of stuff, it actually is the one area of cultural policy and public policy that I am super passionate about that has absolutely nothing to do with my dissertation. It's I have 2 blogs, one's a musicology blog and one's my bike blog. So, like, I'm completely serious. All right.
I'm Juan Poblete. I'm an associate professor in the literature department in Latin American and Latino studies at UC Santa Cruz, and I feel so old and so incompetent. I'm working on a book. I'm by training a 19th centuryist, and I work on the history of reading in the 19th century, specifically in Chile, with some pretensions of expanding that to Latin America. And this is a fairly new field in Latin America, the history of reading itself. But I have, for the time being, bracketed that, and I'm writing a book on Chilean neoliberal culture. And the people I'm working on are artist, a radio station, a feminist alternative radio station, a comic, a chronica writer, chronica being short pieces that are mostly published in magazines and newspapers, who is also a radio person and a gay performer, and Chilean film. And my idea is to analyze how is it that these people who are basically resisting the cultural transformation of the nation under neoliberalism, are they themselves the results of the infrastructural conditions created by neoliberalism? That is to say, they are the result of the globalization of Chilean society from both above and below. And so that space there where the feminist radio station is funded by a Dutch non-governmental organization. which is only made possible by the insertion of Chile in the neoliberal historical regime after dictatorship. That European help is the result of that catastrophe. So in some way, the way I explain this for myself is if I studied in the 19th century the way in which the national order was created and literature had a way in producing the subjectivities that were adequate for that, the people I'm studying now and the works and institutions I'm studying now attempt to explain the disorder of the nation. How is it that the nation has become disorganized? And what kind of order can be made out of this disorder?
My name is Brandon Wolf. I'm starting my second year as a PhD student in performance studies at UC Berkeley. And Amy's word unwieldy is the best way I can think about what I'm about to say. But I guess I have the luxury and very, very daunting opportunity of being at the beginning stages, so I have a lot of things that I'm kind of exploring. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on 3 of them. Very, very little. So I guess broadly speaking, I'm really interested in something, and the only way I've kind of been able to think about it up until now is something like institutional memory. So the impact of different kinds of institutional narratives and the narratives inherent within different types of institutions, and the impacts those narratives have on different types of art, and particularly performance practice, and the way in which those performance practices think about themselves or not as being critical in some way or other of the institutions in which they're situated. So I kind of have 2 sites, and I'm trying to figure out if it's going to be an American project or a Berlin-oriented project or some project that tries to span between New York and Berlin or the States and Germany. So the first thing I'm working on that I spent much of last year on is trying to look back at the establishment of the not-for-profit third sector in the United States by going before the Cold War and the New Deal and looking at the establishment of the income tax code in the U.S. And so trying to think about the ways in which the language at the beginning of the tax code have kind of carried through to become 501c3 and some of the problematic. So if you're an arts organization in the United States and you want to be classified as not-for-profit and therefore as charity and get tax-exempt status, so any of your patrons don't have to pay income tax on the money that they donate to you, you have to be registered by the government as a 501c3 organization. And it means that you can't take responsibility for the Protestant. You can take pretty much all political positions, but you can't say vote Republican. Right. And there are a lot of other kind of directions that being 501c3 kind of forces you to do, and one of the things I'm trying to look at is the language inherent in and the situations around how this language got formed and how particular organizations that are becoming 501c3 now are disciplined or whatever the word is, by those particular narratives. Then, moved to Berlin, and I spent the summer there, and I'm just starting to kind of play around with a couple of sites, but there's a museum there called the House of World Culture, the Haus der Kultur und der Welt, and they, for the last couple of years, have had a performance festival called In Transit. And so I'm trying to think about this institution of the House of World Cultures, which has a really interesting kind of problematic history, being donated to the German government by the CIA, and then back in the 50s, and then more recently really trying as a House of World Culture to be in dialogue with the critical discourse around globalization and post-colonialism and stuff like that. And so they're having this they've been having this festival called In Transit, which is about borderlessness and migration, and this summer just happened to be a really interesting set of kind of things that were floating around this festival. One, the recent very problematic legislation in the EU about how long you can hold immigrants for. And then I met with the kind of star artist of the festival, and the only reason she could meet me for coffee was because her visa was being held by the British government and she couldn't go to Britain, to the Tate Britain, to where her next show was. So trying to think about kind of the layers of narratives that kind of are inherent in this institution, and the ways in which that impacts the work that gets produced there. So a lot of other things, but one other kind of plug, and I'm going out on a limb here because I have absolutely no idea if anyone will be interested, but because during Lisa's session yesterday we were talking about artistic praxis, one of the things I was doing in Berlin was translating a Günter Grass play from German into English that we're staging at Berkeley in the fall, called The Plebeians Rehearse the Uprising. And in a lot of ways, it's about so many of the issues that we've been raising here. It's about Bertolt Brecht and his kind of positionality as a cultural political figure in Berlin in the 50s, and he gets approached during the Workers' Uprising of 1953 to kind of lead the revolution against the Soviet government. And he happens to be staging a production of a Shakespeare play that's about the uprising of plebeians and workers. And so we just finished the translation this morning at 6:30 on Skype before we came down here. So I have no idea if anyone would be interested in having a reading over beers or anything, but we have, the text is done, so if there's anyone interested, let me know and we can buy some beer and have a reading of the play. Okay, sorry to ramble on.
Okay, my name is Eric Titterud. I'm in the English department here at UC Irvine. I'm relatively early in the, I just finished my first year working on my exams right now, but I actually have the benefit of having known what I want to do my dissertation on for quite some time, which is to say on zines, particularly associated with the punk and hardcore scene of the past 10 years or so, and particularly focusing on the sort of geographies, both physical and virtual, that the scene sort of takes place in, and how those zines represent them, how they're experienced through new media as well, and the sort of boundary conditions between sort of mainstream culture and the subculture, as well as other subcultures. So the way that sort of internet culture has interacted with, say, zine culture, as well as you know, just sort of punk in general, and just looking at a lot of the sort of economics of that sort of interaction and whatnot. And I also play in a band. Which not uncoincidentally possibly has a Japanese name, but we don't actually play Japanese music though. Oh, you don't? Oh yeah. Well, I was thinking about all the music labels that you So, anyways, I guess we're the inverse then. Yeah. Well, most of the ones that I look at in terms of because I am in a literature department, I did want to give a little bit less of a. I'm not exactly sure how you describe it, but thus far, at least the literature that I'm aware of hasn't actually focused on individual zines in terms of the narratives that they tell. And most of the ones that I'm looking at focusing on are some of the longer running ones, so they aren't actually internet, but there will be sort of a comparison that will be made in terms of how the internet culture has been represented in those. So like Aaron Comet Bus, Al Burian's Burn Collector, Doris, a few other zines like that. But then there's some internet ones as well. The interesting thing about those is that they tend to not always be zines because they sort of fade into blogs essentially, and there just aren't as many people doing that. So anyway.